Hey there, fellow citizens of the internet. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana podcast. Today I have with me James Mulvaney. I think that's how you pronounce it, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. And this conversation is all going to be about podcasting and maybe even a bit more on the creator economy per se, but podcasting in general. So, James, welcome to the Moses Kabandana podcast.
Thanks, Moses. Great to be here. Pleasure to speak to you.
Awesome. Pleasure's all mine. Pleasure's all mine. So before I hit record, I asked you where you're calling from, but just for the audience so they know where you're calling from, where are you calling from?
So I'm in Manchester in the UK. Everyone will know Manchester because of the two great football teams here, of course.
Yep. And wait, I don't follow football, soccer for the American cousins. How did they do in this round, in this time around?
Yeah, Manchester City are doing really well. And obviously it was the Euros final as of time recording, Euros final a couple of days ago. And we were beat to Spain, which is, I'm perfectly happy with that. I mean, I think our team played really well, but, the best team won, obviously. So, and you know what? I don't really follow football or soccer that much either. I'm just so happen to live in a city where everyone's really obsessed. So you kind of have to show a little bit of interest at least.
Yeah. Did you grow up as a huge fan of football, or not really?
No. I was a nerdy kid. My sports are like business and marketing and stuff like that. Not not like kicking a ball around a field or throwing stuff around. So I was always kind of shy and a bit. I'd prefer to be on a computer or playing games and stuff like that. And from an early age, learned how to code, and I was interested in learning Photoshop, design skills, all that sort of stuff, which is kind of like carved my career, really.
Yeah. What was your absolute earliest video game that you played, if you remember?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember like Tomb Raider. That was a big one when I was, and also no, the earliest one would have probably been it would have been GoldenEye on N64, which is like in the kind of mid to late 90s.
Okay. I think the very first video game that I played, I guess it doesn't really count. Just for a quick context, I was born in Rwanda. I grew up in Mozambique. And so by the time like computer video games were a thing, I was getting introduced to the Snake game, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
I think I saw it on a calculator or like something like that. And I was just mesmerized that there's just little dots that keep getting bigger and bigger the more that you touch one dot. So that was like my introduction into the video game era. Okay, awesome. So then what like brought you to be so fascinated with like coding and computers and video games, and not like, let's say, other fields? Like what drew you to computers?
That's a good question. Yeah, I remember, when I grew up in the 90s, and computers were not widely adapted at the start of the 90s, but by the end of the 90s, like everyone had one in their living room. They were in schools, etc. And I think one of my first memories of like using the computer was I used to like paint, and I was like quite artistic as a kid, I guess. So the first thing I was doing was like drawing silly things on paint, like little sort of cartoons and stuff like that. Yeah. That was when I was maybe like, I don't know, 6 years old or something. And then the internet came along, and my earliest memories, my mum used to work in a university, and we didn't have the internet at home, and they had the internet at the university, as was the case, like a lot of families in the 90s, sort of was towards the end of the decade when people started actually getting the internet at home. So I go into her office, like my days off at school and stuff, and I'd be downloading pictures and printing them out like the Simpsons cartoons and stuff. So yeah, it kind of grew from there. And then when we did get a computer at home, I was like on it every day. We got the internet. I was like, the first thing I learned to do was when I was maybe like 15, 16, was I was on Photoshop. And my first business, I guess, was I was effectively like a graphic designer. I was designing logos, websites, and just trying to like, I was just a kid in his bedroom, just trying to make a little bit of pocket money, And it sort of all just stemmed from there, really.
Do you remember the first thing that you did that got you paid?
Yeah, someone's asked me this in a podcast before, and it was it was, I believe, I think it was like designing a, you know, like you see adverts on the internet, banner ads. You still see them on like news articles and stuff.
Yeah.
It was designing a bunch of banners for, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some sort of business. You know, they wanted me to design some banner adverts that they could put on, you know, used to advertise on other websites. So I took their logo and what they wanted to say and kind of made them in these little flashy animated banner ads. And that was the first job I got paid for, I think.
Wow. And how old were you?
I was probably 15, I reckon, at that stage. 15 or 16.
Goodness.
Yeah, it was just when I was finishing secondary school, and we had what they call we have it here in the UK. It's called study leave, and it's basically where they give you time off, you know, time away from your lessons to go home and actually just study and prepare for your exams. So rather than studying for the exams, I was doing my own education. This was when I was learning all these things, starting to learn a bit about how to build websites and all that kind of stuff.
Wow. And then fast forward to today, you've worked on Matchmaker.fm, which we're going to get more into it, podcast.co, radio.co. I mean, I guess the answer to this is pretty obvious, but when you were in your early stages, so creating these banners and early websites, did you think that the trajectory was going to look like this, like, or it wasn't even in your imagination?
I think I was just doing what I love to do. You know, I was creative. I enjoyed making things, like building stuff. And, you know, when I learned how to, you know, initially I was, say, more involved or interested in the visual aspect of it because it was kind of easy to do. And then I suppose I learned a little bit more about the workings of the technology that sits behind websites. So funnily enough, now I haven't touched Photoshop. I haven't written a line of code for probably 10 or 12 years. You know, I still enjoy creating things, but you know, nowadays I have a team who works alongside me to do all that stuff, and they will do a far better job than I ever would be able to do myself. So I think the early days, you know, you kind of get those building blocks of getting a good understanding of, you know, how to put something together, you know, put a website together, and how the concept of like how a website works, like that hangs off a database and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's given me an advantage as such that, you know, I have a basic enough understanding of what the developers or what the product teams actually do on a day-to-day. So I can kind of speak their language to a certain degree.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's dive into Matchmaker.fm.
Sure.
I'm obviously a podcaster, and I have a podcast, and I started doing it a bit more seriously a little over a year now. Before that, it was, well, I'm going to release an episode here, an episode there. I don't know. It was all about me, right? Just sharing who I am, my story and whatnot, but it did not involve other guests. The second that I had to start bringing in other guests, I ran into this massive wall that is like, okay, one, how do I find people that I want to talk to? And two, how do I do that sustainably, right? Because the very first thing that I want to do is reach out to the network that I have, my friends, my family, someone that knows someone that knows someone. But I didn't know how sustainable that would be. So eventually I would run out of a cousin that knows a cousin, right? So then how do I scale that?
Yeah.
And when I typed in find people for my podcast on Google, I saw this Matchmaker.fm. And the very first thing that came to mind was, I'm no longer in the dating scene. For some reason, I thought it was a dating website, you know?
Yeah, you're not the first person to have said that.
Okay, interesting. That's a good data point for you. But I saw like a text right next to it that said, like, I think it was like podcasting guests or something, or like find your podcasting match or something. Clicked on it and so there was its history. But it has allowed me to scale, to be able to find competent people in different fields that I'm interested in talking about, and bringing those guests on and then having a very fruitful conversation. So how did that come across to you? Like, how did Matchmaker come to be?
Yeah, so Matchmaker was a lockdown project for us. Before we worked on Matchmaker, we'd started a marketing campaign because we have another product called podcast.co, which is a platform to, you know, create and host podcasts on. So we were looking at different routes to market, and we realized obviously a lot of podcasts have always been based on interviews. Okay. And we ran a couple of, we created a couple of landing pages because we thought, well, a lot of people who are looking to be on podcasts end up starting their own podcast, right? So it would be a good source of leads for us. And
Yeah.
we created 2 landing pages. One was advertised towards guests who want to be on shows, and the other one was for shows who are looking for guests. And we kind of realized that both of these separate funnels we created, if you like, marketing funnels, that were actually getting traction. And they were live for a couple of months, and we maybe had a couple of hundred inquiries or leads who had filled out the forms on those websites. And we thought, well, why don't we go one further and we can ask for some details of what sort of guests they're looking for or what sort of shows they would like to be on. Because this is the thing with podcasting, you can talk about anything. And, sometimes the more specific the niche is better, and we can kind of get onto that later. But ultimately, there's no point of trying to match someone who's interested in talking about cars, like the automotive industry, with someone who's interested in talking about, I don't know, crypto or podcasting.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like every podcast has got sometimes similar guests, but there's normally kind of a generalization of the sorts of guests they want to be on. So we thought, well, we could build software to match these 2 groups of people together, basically people looking to guest on shows, and also people who've got shows who are looking for interesting characters to interview. And also, be really specific about it. So, if you want to find someone who's a marketing expert, great, but marketing's a broad church, right? We want to find someone who's an expert, say, in video marketing or search engine optimization. Those are the things that will allow people to craft really good stories in their show. And at the time, there was nothing out there which allowed people to do this. And yeah, you could go and hit up social media, but again, it's a bit of a shot in the dark. Sometimes people on social media respond, sometimes they don't. So we then, during 2020 came around, COVID was kind of starting to kick in. A lot of people were going home and suddenly working from home and had more time on their hands to do things like podcasts. And of course, there was podcasts being launched left, right, and center. And there was this kind of great desire, I think, to connect with other people, because a lot of people, as I say, suddenly were locked in their houses, not kind of doing any face-to-face interviews, or they were looking for ways to communicate and either tell their stories with the world because they were kind of feeling kind of a little bit isolated, or engage with other people and find out what other people were doing. So it kind of was a timing thing. I think we got it right. We launched Matchmaker around February, March 2020. And we had a great first year. It was really just a side project for us to start off with. And we had, I think we grew from 0 to like 20,000 users in the first year, something like that. Wow. It was, wow. Yeah, because there was just such a desire for people to connect. And as I say, more people started podcasts than ever before in 2020. And the industry had been growing at that point, but it really exploded.
So that's, I'm going to need to take some hints on how to start a side project like that. That's insane. So you mentioned that a lot of people got into podcasting during 2020. And one thing that I'm noticing in this podcast landscape as a whole is that there is a lot of people that get into the podcasting space, but the fallout rate is almost just as great. So the question that I have for you is what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about starting and continuing a podcast?
There's some stats on that which I heard recently. I haven't got them in front of me. I wish I did. But it's something like there's 2 million podcasts or something thereabouts, right? And I think there was a stage where there was around 800,000, which were really like considered active. E.g., there was when you say an active podcast, you could say there's been an episode perhaps released within the past month, right? Or there's more than, say, 2 or 3 episodes as part of the podcast. But actually look at the stats now, and I think there's something like 300,000 active podcasts, which is far less than it was 2 or 3 years ago. I think there's partly because a lot of people started them in lockdown. They were lockdown projects, and as things are, they are completely back to what they were before now. Still a lot of people working from home maybe, but I think people have not got the time perhaps that they did during lockdown. So they were like, okay, you know, let's do this for a year or whatever, and then they've just kind of fallen out the loop. But then, you know, there's still, that actually opens up opportunities because it means it's less competitive. You know, there's a larger number of podcasts than there's ever been, but the actual number of active podcasts where they're releasing episodes every, you know, on a regular basis, whether that be every month or every week, is still relatively low, and certainly less competitive compared to other platforms like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, etc. Why do people fall out? I think, well, there's a few things. Or there's some of the misconceptions, perhaps. Let's start off with. I think people think the entry to start a podcast now is relatively easy, right? You know, anyone can fire up, you know, a tool like we're using now, Riverside, which is a great platform, or just hit record on their phone or on the computer and start talking, right? That doesn't necessarily mean the content's good, though, you know? Right. And I don't know if people, number one, are prepared to put the thought and the work into actually making themselves interesting as a broadcaster, you know, as an entertainer. So, you know, becoming a good interviewer or becoming a good talker is something that you have to work at. Sometimes it comes naturally to some people, but I think for a lot of people, perhaps it doesn't. And the other thing is people just think, well, I'll record a couple of episodes and suddenly I'm going to get millions of listeners, right? And, you know, it's just going to, or money is just going to fall down from the trees. And of course it doesn't work like that. You know, like anything, you've got to be strategic in how you execute, and you've got to work at it and make sure that you're putting the hours in. And simply recording 2 or 3 episodes is not going to make you a big star. You know, it doesn't work like that. So, and even if you look at some of the big podcasts out there, you know, you go back and you can see that they've been doing it for years and years, and they've had a lot of time before they've really hit the big time, if that makes sense.
Yep. Huh. No, that's it makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that I try to do is I created this course, right, for people that, okay, maybe, because podcasting, depending on the format that you want to do, if you want to do like a video and audio podcasting, things start to get complex relatively fast. And it's not just, you know, turning on a camera and recording. Like you said, you might need to be able to create interesting content and or be able to speak well. So all of a sudden, audio engineering enters the equation, video editing enters the equation. Having to know the different types of microphones enters the equation. Is it just you? Is it you and someone else? Is it remote? It can get complex pretty fast.
Oh yeah.
But the course that I created is like, okay, let's just assume that all you have is a smartphone, okay? And we can complexify, if that's a word, things from there on, right? But let's just assume that all you have is a smartphone, and let's start from there, and let's create 10, 20, 30 episodes before starting to add things, right?
Yeah.
And it's being relatively well received.
Oh, cool.
But the problem that I have now is like with online course completion rates, it's like non-existent. It's like really, really low.
Yeah.
So it's I'm trying to figure out how to and it's a free course, by the way, but I'm trying to figure out like how is it that you make people understand that podcasting is simple to do, but it has to come from the perspective of a marathon. Like this takes time, and how do you sustainably create a podcast? So okay, but that's another question that we can like tackle later on. You mentioned earlier about people having the expectation that money is gonna start falling from the sky, you know, after like 2 episodes. Can you touch on some of the ways that someone can monetize their podcast?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the obvious one is advertising, right? Everyone thinks, okay, well, let's run ads. The problem with the way that the ads space is in podcasting at the moment is it's not really fair to like smaller creators. Like most of the networks out there and the advertising platforms only want to touch podcasts once you've got, say, like a few thousand downloads per episode. And working up to that is quite hard. So if you're only getting, say, 500 downloads an episode, generally it's quite hard to get advertising. I think YouTube is weirdly Spotify and Apple obviously a big what you think of when you think about I'm going to listen to a podcast, but actually YouTube is the number one way that people consume podcasts currently, and that's because it kind of begs the question, like, what is a podcast then? Because actually YouTube, you subscribe to channels and you watch videos, right? So how, because YouTube have kind of launched their own podcasting thing. I think YouTube Google have just, because they've got the scale, they're probably best suited to actually like start earning something, even if it's very small amounts. You know, they've got this amazing advertising platform built in. So in theory, you could make some money from day one, even if you're not getting thousands and thousands of downloads an episode. So that's the obvious thing that people think of. But actually, the other ways to monetize are by using it as a marketing tool to sort of build a fan base, which maybe will spend money with you in other ways. So it could be that you're a business and you're looking for customers. We have a production company. So alongside Matchmaker, we do a lot of podcasts for commercial entities, you know, like brands, things like charities, NGOs, and entrepreneurs, you know, people looking to kind of grow their personal brands. So when we sit down with clients who have approached us to produce podcasts for them, we always look at, you know, what commercial benefit they're expecting from doing this. So it might be they want to drive traffic to their website, or they want to find more people in their market. So, for example, one of the podcasts we produce, we've done I think we're on to the third series with them now, is for a software company. And that software company, they make software which independent medical practitioners use to run their practice. So it can be like things like physiotherapists, right? This is like back office software. So it's really simple. What they do is they basically, you know, they want to find more people who are, you know, for example, physiotherapists who want to use their software. That's how they make their money. So they're not necessarily looking to monetize the podcast. What they're using that podcast to do is reach more people in that marketplace. And the way they do that is by interviewing, it's called Healthy Practice. They interview their clients and people in the industry on, you know, how they run their practices, you know, how they go and acquire customers and keep their patients healthy and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, that's kind of like an indirect route. And other times they could be used by companies for like internal comms as well. You know, like we do a lot of stuff with larger organizations. They want to use audio as a tool to keep in touch with their workforce, which sometimes can be very distributed, you know. For example, we're working with a security company. They have lots of people who are driving around in like patrol cars, responding to alarm call outs late at night. They're never at a desk. So doing things like sending updates via email just isn't possible. But audio is a good tool to do that.
Right.
And of course, you look at podcasts that are kind of more consumer focused. They do things like running, you know, some of the ones that have been really successful. Tours seem to be becoming increasingly popular. Taking the podcast on the road, audiences will go and pay to see it. I've been to a couple like recently, and they're great. They're not necessarily a podcast, but it's just when you listen to a podcast, you kind of build that relationship. That's the cool and the powerful thing about audio is you have like this intimate bond you kind of form with people. And then when you actually go and see them in real life, you're like, wow, they're actually like a real person. There they are on a stage talking about something that I'm really interested in. So, yeah. And of course, other things like selling merchandise, you know, the list goes on. There's just different ways. It's just about kind of building that captivated audience who are really kind of passionate about a certain topic and figure out ways. And monetization should come next. I think that should be the first thing you do, you know, and then worry about how to make money from it.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that breakdown. It kind of encompasses pretty much all classes of monetization. Whether
there's a lot there, I know.
Yeah, exactly. Like even if you're like a complete beginner, like you said, you can go the YouTube route, starting like a YouTube video podcast, and then doing affiliate links type stuff. You know, leaving even if it's a link of a microphone that you use under there, and you know you can start earning some form of income from that, and then all the way to you own a business and you want to use a podcast as a means to reach the audience that you serve. So that is. It's very thorough. Thank you for that. Before we touch, you pretty much touched on it already, podcast.co. But I have a quick question about your early childhood. What is the absolute earliest memory that you can think of? Like the very first flash that comes to mind as a human being.
I do have, I remember, the earliest memory I've got is I remember being in nursery school, so I would have been about 3 years old. And yeah, I have a couple of memories from that period. Nothing really like specific. It's just like out being we were in the sort of playground, and I remember there was like a guy who was walking his dog, and we were just chatting to him because his dog was really friendly, just stuff like that. So, not many people can remember being that young, but I've got a couple of memories starting at that age. Yeah, I've got quite a good memory. I think I'm one of these people. I seem to remember like a lot of detail from random moments of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I have, I'm going through the process of writing every single memory that I can think of, and I've divided that in like 5-year chunks, 5-year increments. I have like 21 years written now, but it's like the more that I write, the more that I remember, right? And that's like stage 0. Stage 1 is gonna be interviewing the people that knew me in those different stages and telling them these memories that I have, and see what else can they add in, right?
Or if they remember it,
exactly. Or if any of the memories that I have actually happened at all, right? So it's always like interesting to talk to, because I have a very terrible memory. Like it's trash. So there's a huge part of me that's like, okay, these 2 decades of memories that I've written, it's probably 1 year, like all put together. But I always like to ask people like, what's the earliest memory that they have? Because it kind of like breaks the cycle of thinking for a second, right? But you have an amazing memory, so that didn't take long. People take a long time to answer that question. I found. So okay, now back to.
It's probably because it's just to touch on that. Like that's interesting, because I find it really interesting because I've got lots of friends and family and stuff whose memory's not great. Some people it is, and I think because I've thought about that in the past, like I know the answer to that straight away because it's something I've kind of been consciously aware of, or I've had that conversation with friends where like, some people have no memory before like the age of 10 or whatever. And we're like, I remember, I've got loads of memories when I was like 3, 5, 6, 7, etc. So but I don't know a lot about memory. And it's like there's people who study on loads of books and studies on it and stuff. But interesting. Interesting. Don't think I've ever been asked that question on a podcast either before. So
okay, I'm gonna make that a note. Yeah. Also, so any earlier songs that you used to love as a kid that you still listen to today?
Yeah, so me and I've got a brother who's 4 years younger than me, and we have got a couple of shared playlists, right, on Spotify where we both add songs in. One is when in the early 2000s we were like both really into like rock music, so there was all like, this explosion of bands like Green Day and Sum 41 and Blink-182, and we've just got like this big. We used to have all these CDs. When CDs were a thing, right? Remember them? So we would literally be listening to this music, and it was like the one of those things that we like as brothers, because we kind of like we're pretty close now, but when we were kids, we fought a little bit and we weren't always close. Yeah. But it was the one thing we bonded over was music, and we just have this playlist, and it's really nostalgic listening to it. And sometimes I still put it on, and when we both remember a song, like it could be something really obscure. We'll add it to it and we'll be like, do you remember this song? Like I've just added it. Yeah. And there's another playlist we've got, which is like mum and dad car tracks. So this is music that my parents would play when we were like going around taking us to school or whatever.
That's awesome.
So yeah, there's tons of music on those playlists. I could have a look if you want, but there's, as I say, we'll go for like those rock songs, like those sort of like I would have been about 12, 13, and he would have been about 8 or 9 at the time. So,
wow, yeah. It's another topic that I need to bring someone, maybe like a psychoanalyst or like a psychologist or something, to tell me like what like the significance, maybe even religious significance of music. Because when you listen to such like a nostalgic song, it's not just the song that you're listening to. It takes literally almost takes you back to that time, and you have the same feelings and everything, and it's just I gotta figure out.
Here's another one linking those early memories of music and memory together. It's like, how do you? Because I don't know about you, but I can remember when I hear these songs, I know all the words, or I might not know all the words. But, how do you know so many, like literally thousands of songs, and you just remember the lyrics to them? It's weird.
Yeah.
You can't when you go down the shop. You can't remember that you need to buy milk or whatever.
Yeah. It's gotta be stored somewhere, like deep in the subconscious.
It's a different part of the brain. Yeah.
Like a year and a half ago, we were my girl and I we traveled back to Mozambique, And we went to this tiny island called Island of Mozambique. And we're sitting there, maybe eating an ice cream or something. And this song that I hadn't heard in probably, well, so I'm 30 and a half. So in about 21 years, 23 years came on. And I hadn't sang it in over 2 decades. But all of a sudden, all the words came back. And I was singing and I was moving. And it came back with the memories of being in the country at that time. It just a lot of things came back within like the length of a 5-minute song. So yeah, I gotta bring someone onto the podcast and let me in on this whole memory stuff. And so that and that it plays a major role into why I have this podcast to begin with, which is carrying a conversation with someone that has deep knowledge in a particular field, right? But not make it so like question 1, question 2. It's just there's this dynamic conversation that at the end of the conversation, I like to walk away having learned something, and I'm bringing the audience with me along this learning journey. And so that leads me into the question about podcast.co, which is not, well, let me know, like what's the core of podcast.co?
Yeah, so podcast.co is a hosting platform. It basically allows you to start podcasting very, very quickly and easily. And that was when we launched, we already had a platform called radio.co. And in a similar way, like radio.co is like a live streaming platform, allows anyone to start a radio station. So they're both basically software products that just kind of demystify that process and just, allow you to use technology to, number one, make the process kind of easy, and also help reduce costs. So you're not investing in lots of equipment to do all of this sort of stuff. And we've, as I say, we've been running those products now for a number of years. With radio.co, obviously it's more for radio stations and live streams. So we have a lot of music focused stuff on there. With podcasts, we find it is more obviously talk focused interviews, information and education, that sort of stuff.
Okay. And I saw that you have, is it a white labeling service as well?
On podcast.co or?
Yeah, podcast.co. Where maybe you do the editing and producing part of it for an agency.
Right. Yeah, so our production service. So yeah, we initially started this as part of podcast.co. We have a separate brand for it now called Q, which is CUE, which is Q Podcasts. And yeah, we have a production team. We do a lot of production for businesses, but we do also work with other agencies. So we found that some of our partners, they have got, they might be like design companies or they might be marketing agencies. They don't really have the expertise in the audio space. So they'll use us to, work with their end client. So for example, one of the clients that we worked with in this way was quite a well-known bank here in the UK. They worked with an agency who did their communication strategy for them, and they turned around to them and said, we want to do a podcast, but that agency had no idea how to actually do that. So they approached us and said, can you help us with this? And we created a podcast for them, which was aimed at first-time buyers looking to get mortgages. And we worked, as I say, as a production partner, so kind of behind the scenes, just sort of putting it all together for them.
Okay. Interesting. So back to the basics. For a lot of the audience that I'm trying to reach, as far as podcasting is concerned, is the super entry level type, right? And one of the most common questions that I get is, how do I choose a topic for my podcast?
Yeah.
So how does someone go about choosing a topic for their podcast?
I think the only piece of advice I could offer there is it's got to be something that you're interested in, because you've got to be, as we've discussed earlier, you've got to be in it for the long run, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time talking or interviewing people about this. And if you're not passionate or you're not interested about it, and you're just thinking, oh, this is something that's a sort of fast route to success, but actually you don't care about it, it's just going to be boring. You're not going to enjoy doing it. And if you don't enjoy doing it, what's the point, I think, So I think it's got to be something that you're really passionate about or interested in, and you want to learn about it and explore. And that's the benefit of having guests on, I guess, is that you can kind of broaden your horizons. But fundamentally, you've got to be interested in what your guest's talking about, because if you're not, then I just think you're gonna end up burning out really quickly,
right?
Or it won't come across as genuine,
Exactly. One of the things that I typically say is, one, you have to be interested in it, or you have to be an expert in that field, or you have to be extremely curious about that field. So, for example, like if I want to bring on someone to talk about the correlation between memory and music, I'm not an expert in that field.
Yes.
I don't know anything about it, but my curiosity about it, now that I've had this conversation with you, it's like off the charts, right? So I'm able to maintain a high level of energy having that conversation, even though I know absolutely nothing about it, right? So, because some people are like, well, I have like 5 years of experience in this field, and so maybe I can talk about it, but I don't have that 10,000, hours that people are considered experts in. It's like, relax. If you if you're curious about something enough that you want to learn about it, there's a high likelihood that someone else out there wants to, like, has the same curiosity, and you almost doing them a disservice by you refusing to pursue this natural curiosity that is in you. So as we come to a close here, I want to respect your time here. What are some good questions that I'm not really like thinking about when it comes to podcasting space?
Well, that's a good question in itself. I guess trying to think like what questions I would ask myself or what questions I had, because the first ever podcast I created, I was like just coming out of university. It was probably like 2009, 2010.
Wow.
And there wasn't really like that back then. It was like early days for podcasting. I didn't even really listen to them, but basically me and I was in a kind of business like a startup accelerator, right? So I used to share an office with other businesses, and I then ended up setting up a web design company for a little bit of time with someone who's a very good friend of mine, Steve. Still know him, still good friends. Went for lunch with him last week, and we just thought, like, let's get together once a week or once a month or however it was, like a couple of microphones. I was kind of into radio and audio stuff, so I knew how to set it all up, and we would just record based on like what we thought was kind of interesting to us. But I think what we didn't do was think about like actually what the audience were like, what audience we were trying to target, what they wanted from it. So I think we go off on a lot of tangents, but it was good fun. And as I say, the podcasting, there was no book on podcasting back then, whereas obviously there's all sorts of stuff you can read and learn about now. And also the audience out there wasn't anything like it is now. Everyone's listening to podcasts these days. So
right.
I think the question I would ask myself, I would sort of how to summarize that would just be like, yes, as I said earlier, just do something you're interested in, but actually think about what is the end goal in terms of the audience you want to attract, and who are they? What are they interested in? What are they going to learn from your show? Or what are they going to learn from, get out of listening to your podcast on an ongoing basis? If you can kind of nail that, you'll be onto a winner.
Okay. And what is one super, super basic microphone for beginners that you would recommend?
There are loads out there now.
Yep.
There are, I would say, it depends on the budget, really. The the most popular podcasting microphone is called the Blue Yeti, right? But actually, doesn't sound very good. I'm trying to think now. Do you know what? If you go on my YouTube channel, I've got loads of microphone reviews on there. So I would just say, one of the cheapest and best options, which I think is maybe what you're using now, is just like Apple headphones. They've got pretty good microphones on. Yep. You probably already have a pair, so don't need to spend any money.
Right.
But yeah, Shure make good microphones. Rode probably make good microphones. They're one of the sort of good starter mics. But Rode have got a good range from sort of like $100 right up to $1,000 or whatever. So,
yep. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. The podcast microphone space has also just exploded.
It has.
And so I almost always bring people back to the phone. It's like it's amazing the quality of the microphone that is embedded on the phone. I mean, like if you just I'm a huge believer of like just start, and then which you are shooting yourself in the foot at some point, because like you said, maybe you start and you're having a conversation about nothing, about everything, so you're missing on a particular audience in the medium to long run, right? But I'd still take that versus I don't have the right microphone, I don't have the right tool, I don't know where I'm going to start, and so I will never start. Right?
People get very obsessed with like what equipment do they need and stuff. When you're right, you just like the more important thing is the actual narrative that you're telling. Like the content of your show is more important than the tech. You know, once you've kind of got a few episodes down, then you can worry about making it sound better. But the other thing that people don't think about a lot of the time is the environment they're recording in. You know, or if you are recording on your phone, you know, like holding it at a steady like level away from your mouth. You know, if you've got it right over there, it's not going to sound great. Or if you're really too close to it, it's not going to sound great. So have it, you know, just focus on like microphone technique, and also think about the room you're in. You know, is there loads of traffic outside? If this going to come across on your podcast, it's not going to sound great. Is the kids screaming in the background, or you know, is a big echoey space, that sort of stuff. So just try and find a nice quiet space. Think about like some people record in their wardrobe, you know, because it's just like a really dead space. It kind of creates a nice sound.
Yeah,
stuff like
that. Man,
you know,
you just basically took one of the modules in my course and just condensed it down to 15 seconds. So now I'm gonna go cry after this. So, but that is amazing. That's what I mean. It's like you have this entire library of knowledge that you've collected over time with experience and actually working with real people, that you're able to impart that knowledge. You know, just like that. You know,
and you know what? Sometimes I think as well, like it's quite hard to sometimes because you that stuff all seems so simple to me now. So sometimes it's hard to decant that because you're like, oh, it's obvious that people, but actually a lot of people don't think about those things. You know,
right? And there's always a big delta between the conceptual understanding of something versus the implementation of that, right? So that leads me to my follow up. You mentioned your YouTube channel earlier, and I think you stopped posting right about a year ago or so. So can you go into like what it takes to like address longevity when it comes to content creation, and maybe like touch on burnout and being able to manage things, content creation in the long term, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went at it full on, like YouTube, also LinkedIn. And I had we hired someone to work alongside me full time, basically working on my personal brand, right? So as well as creating content under our brands, under our businesses, I was creating content. And I did about 2 or 3 years of YouTube once a week, and it was just having too much. In the end, it was having a big impact on my schedule, and also the producer who was working on that with me, Graham. We ended up having to put more resource into doing client work, so it made sense for his time to be spent on stuff we were kind of, I suppose, getting paid to do. Funnily enough, the YouTube channel has continued growing, even though I've not posted to it for, you know, so sometimes having a break is fine. You know, I'm not ruling out I might go back to it one day. Probably won't be doing a video every week, being honest.
Right.
And again, with my LinkedIn strategy, we're having discussions at the moment on how to kickstart that. But I think perhaps there was a little bit of, you know, because we do so many different things, we're targeting consumers, you know, sort of like podcasters, people who are interested in getting into podcasting. And that's really what the YouTube channel was targeted towards. But also on the other side, we're working with more businesses, enterprise, you know, on our production company. And it was kind of like a bit of a cross between the two. And I think if moving forward, going back to the LinkedIn stuff, I'm going to be focusing more on the businesses, the enterprise, not on like which microphone shall I buy or this sort of stuff.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's just, again, it's about focusing on what is important to you and looking at the sort of, again, when you do it, I gave it a good 2-3 year run, and we were looking at the time versus the return. So it's kind of made sense to put a pause on it for a bit.
Okay. Well, we're sadly coming to this hour, which I don't know how fast it just went by super fast. And so completely random question. If you were to take a random trip tomorrow to a country other than your own, where would you go and how long would you stay?
Oh wow, okay. Well, yeah. So you know, I've never been to the Caribbean before. So it's not a country,
Okay.
but I'd love to go to the Caribbean. And you know, Australia as well. I've got two answers there. One of my friends moved to Australia about 4 years ago, and she's back in the UK at the moment. So I saw her briefly on Friday, and she's like, "You need to still come to Australia," but it's like it's such a long way to travel, and expensive to get there, and it's no point. I can't just go there for like 2-3 days. I've got to go for a couple of weeks. So let's say Australia. There we go.
Okay. Okay. Are you like growing up? Were you a huge traveler? Like, did that call your name?
Yeah, a little bit. I think as a we used to go. My parents, we used to go to France a lot. Stuff we didn't really go that far away, but since I've grown up, I've sort of broadened my horizons a bit. I mean, I've been to most of Europe now. I've still not been to Asia, but yeah, I've been to most of Europe. Been to the US quite a bunch of times. Went to Brazil recently, so yeah, I've kind of been around a little bit now.
Okay, okay. I'm trying. I haven't been to Asia either, or Australia. It's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
We spent this first half of the year in Central America, and I don't know what's coming up next. But I was born in Rwanda, grew up in Mozambique, and so
Yeah.
I've been to the African continent, but haven't been to Asia yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Languages? Any languages call your name?
I can't speak any languages. I spend quite a lot of time in Spain, so I should probably learn some Spanish. But no, I've not spent that much. I've not. You know, that was my like worst failing at school. I was a pretty good student overall. I wasn't like straight A's or anything. But the one thing I messed up when I was doing my exams was French. I just couldn't. I was just not interested at all.
Yeah. Well, it's not for everybody.
No.
It is not for everybody. Well, James, it's really been an amazing conversation. Any final thoughts that you want to leave the audience? Let's say for that person that's on the edge between starting a podcast and diving in, and or that business that thinks that there is really no way of leveraging podcasting to grow their own business. It doesn't sound like a thing that should be possible. Any final words that you want to leave on?
Well, I would say, think about being a guest on someone else's show. It's a good way to get experience. Go on Matchmaker. Think about what you already know about and practice kind of speaking and talking about a subject that you're familiar with. That's a good way of like dipping your toes before you're actually full on starting your own show. So I'd say that's my advice there.
Okay. James, thank you so much for coming to the Moses Kabandana podcast. It's been a huge pleasure. I'm glad that I saw your profile on Matchmaker.fm. I wasn't quite sure if that was like a real profile even, especially because it said that you were the founder of Matchmaker. I was like, there's no way this is a real profile. But you responded, and here you are. We're having a conversation, and seriously, it's been amazing. And thank you for bringing this knowledge to my audience here. And a happy Tuesday to you.
Yeah, happy Tuesday. Thanks very much for having me, Moses. I appreciate it.
I appreciate. Oh, quick thingy. Where can people learn more about you?
All right, so I have a website which is jamesm.com, and that's got a link to my social media and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, jamesm.com, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Moses Kabandana podcast.
Thank you very much.